I have buried men, and I have stood over them, and I have read their names into the wind. But I had never, in 23 years of service, been asked to take a man off a watch he refused to leave. And I will tell you now, before I tell you anything else, that I am glad I failed. His name was Private Edric Lyle, and the night the great storm came down off the Worm Sea, he was standing the honor watch at the Mausoleum of the Kings, on the high ground above the fictional city of Caroudine, in the kingdom we serve. I was the duty officer that night. I am the one who gave the order to bring him in, and I am the one he would not obey. You should understand what the mausoleum is, because the whole of this hangs on it. It is not the palace, not the cathedral, not any place the crowds go. It sits a mile beyond the last lamp of the city, on a bare shoulder of rock the old people call the King's Brow, and inside its gray walls lie 9 generations of the house, the crowned dead of a line older than the road that climbs to it. By custom older than any of us, a single guardsman of the King's Own stands the watch at its bronze doors, day and night, in all weather, in every season, without exception. One man, always one. The watch has never once been broken in 400 years, and every guardsman who has ever worn our colors knows the words that go with the post, because they are cut into the stone above the doors, and we say them when we relieve the sentry. The dead do not stand their own watch. That is the whole creed of the place. The living kings are guarded because they can call for help. The dead kings are guarded because they cannot. There is no one to thank you. There is no crowd to film you. There is no provoker to humble and no plea to answer. There is only the post, and the dark, and the long honor of standing it for men who will never know your name. It is the loneliest duty in the regiment, and we send our youngest to it, because we have learned that a man finds out what he is made of on the King's Brow faster than anywhere else we have. Lyle was 19, 8 months in. I had posted him there myself at the changing of the watch that afternoon, in good light and a falling glass, the barometer dropping like a stone, and the old hands in the guardroom already saying the word they only say a few times in a life. Once in a generation. The kind of storm the fishermen of Caroudine will not put to sea against, and will not stop talking about for 40 years. I did not think much of it when I posted him. The watch goes on in storms, it always has. By 8 o'clock that night, I had stopped thinking it would be an ordinary blow. The wind came first, off the sea, and it did not gust, it leaned. It put its shoulder against the whole hill and held. From the guard post a mile down the road I could hear it finding the gaps in the world, and making a sound out of them I had never heard before, a long low note like a man humming through clenched teeth, and under it the deeper thud of the sea throwing itself at the foot of the brow. The lamps in the lower town began to go. First one street, then a quarter, then the whole bowl of the city dropped into black, and the only light left in all the kingdom that I could see was the small, steady flame of the watch lantern up on the brow, where a 19-year-old boy was standing at a door in the teeth of it. I called the mausoleum on the field line. It was dead. The wind had the wires. That was when I made the first decision, and it was the right one, and I will not pretend otherwise. I took 2 men and the storm truck, and we went up the Brow Road to relieve the watch, not to honor anything, but because no commander with sense leaves a boy alone on an exposed rock in a storm that is taking the roofs off the harbor. I went up there to bring Edric Lyle home. The road climbs in 7 bends. We lost the headlamps to the rain at the 3rd. By the 5th the wind was hitting the truck broadside hard enough to walk it sideways, and Corporal Hesk, who had driven that road 100 times, said quietly, "Sir, if it gets worse than this we will not get back down." And I told him to keep going, because by then I could see the lantern, and the lantern was not moving, and something in me had begun to be afraid in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. We came up onto the brow and into the full force of it, and I have served on 3 frontiers, and I tell you I have never stood in anything like that wind. It took the breath out of your chest sideways. It threw rain that was half sea, salt and stinging, so hard it found the skin under your collar. The lantern by the doors was guttering inside its glass, fighting for every second of its small life. And there, beneath it, at the bronze doors of the dead kings, stood Private Lyle. He was at attention, not braced against the wall, not crouched in the doorway's lee where any sane man would have sheltered. At attention in the open, his rifle at the order, his eyes forward, the rain running off the brim of his cap in a sheet, and his cape standing straight out from his shoulders like a flag in the gale. He was soaked to the bone and white with cold, and the wind was trying to take him off his feet, and he was holding the line as though the king himself were inspecting it. I got down out of the truck and the wind nearly put me on the ground. I fought my way to him, close enough to shout into the side of his face, and I gave the order. I remember the exact words because I have turned them over 1,000 times since. Private Lyle, stand down. You are relieved, get in the truck. And the boy did not move. He did not look at me. His eyes stayed forward on the dark beyond the doors. And he said, in a voice the wind nearly took, but did not, 8 words I will carry to my own grave. Sir, the watch has not been properly relieved. I want you to understand what he meant, because in that moment I did not, and I was angry, and the anger was fear wearing a uniform. I thought it was a boy being a fool with his life over a ceremony. I leaned in and I shouted that the line was down, that this was a once-in-a-generation storm, that no one on earth would count it against him, that the dead would forgive him, that I was ordering him for his own safety to leave the post. He turned his head then, only his head, and in the dying lantern light I saw his face, and it was not the face of a frightened boy at all. It was perfectly calm. The relief is not a man arriving, sir, he said. It is the words said over the post. Until they are said, the watch is mine, and I will not give the kings to the storm. The lantern chose that moment to go out. For one full second we stood in a darkness so complete I could not see my own hand in front of me. There was only the wind and the sea and the streaming cold, and somewhere in it, a 19-year-old boy standing rigid at a bronze door, and I could not even tell any more where he was. Then a sheet of pale lightning walked across the whole bay, and in the white of it I saw him again, exactly as he had been, not flinched, not bent, his eyes forward, and I understood for the first time in 23 years that there were things I had said about duty in the warm light of the guardroom that this boy was now teaching me the true weight of in the dark. But I was still his officer, and I still had a storm to fight, and I made the second decision, and I will defend it to anyone. I sent Hesk and the other man back down the brow in the truck while the road was still passable, with orders to bring back the relief detail, dry kit, and the words of the watch said by a corporal, so the post could be lawfully changed and the boy taken inside before the cold finished what the wind had started. And I stayed. I was not going to leave a soldier of mine alone on that rock, and if he would not come off the post without the relief, then by every standard I held, neither would I. So I took my place at the wall of the mausoleum, in the lee of the buttress where I could see him, and I settled in to wait out a once-in-a-generation storm with a boy who would not move. I have had a long time to think about that night, and I have come to believe that the storm tested 3 of us. It tested the boy at the door, and it tested the regiment that had made him, and it tested me, the man who had come up the hill so sure he was there to save him, and who learned, hour by hour, that he had it precisely backward. The first hour was the wind. It came in waves now, great sustained shoves that made the whole hill seem to flinch, and between them a falling off that was almost worse, because in the lull you could hear the sea below grinding the rocks like a thing chewing. Twice in that hour I saw the gust stagger Lyle, saw him take a step he had not chosen, the wind walking him half a pace off his mark. And both times, the moment the gust eased, he stepped back. Not for me. He did not know if I was even watching. He stepped back onto his mark in the dark for no eyes but his own, and reset his feet, and stood, because the mark was where the watch was kept, and a thing kept is kept exactly. I have inspected 10,000 sentries. I had never seen discipline like it because I had never before seen discipline with absolutely nothing to gain. There was no crowd. There was no commander he believed could see. There was no medal in it and no story in it. Who would ever hear of a boy standing still in the dark? There was only the post, and the dead, and the words he had taken when he took the watch. And he was keeping faith with all three as though the whole kingdom were watching, when not one living soul was. The second hour was the cold, and the cold is the real enemy on the brow, not the wind. The wind only tries to move you. The cold tries to convince you. I felt it work on me where I sheltered, and I was a grown man in a buttress's lee, dry on one side with my back to the worst of it. He was in the open, soaked through hours ago, and the cold would have been telling him by then the old lie it tells every freezing man, that he was not so cold that he might sit a moment, that the doorway was right there, and the lee of it would be warm and no one would know. I called to him through the lull because I could not help it. "Lyle, there is no shame in the doorway, take the lee. The post does not ask you to die for it." And he answered me through the dark, and his voice was slower now, the cold in it, but the words were level. "If I take the lee, sir, then the watch is what is convenient. Then the next man takes the lee in a smaller rain, and the man after him in a drizzle, and one day a man takes the lee for no rain at all. The watch is not where it is easy to stand. It is at the door. They put me at the door." I had no answer for that. I am a major of the King's Own, and I had no answer for a 19-year-old private, because he was right, and we both knew he was right, and the only thing left to do was to be ashamed that I had needed him to say it. It was in the third hour that the storm stopped merely blowing and turned, for a stretch, into something that meant us harm. The lightning came close, close enough that the air itself smelled scorched, close enough that one strike hit the old iron weather vane on the mausoleum's peak with a crack like the sky splitting, and threw blue fire down the lightning chain into the rock not 30 feet from where the boy stood. I shouted his name into the white blindness that followed, certain it had taken him. "Still here, sir," came the voice, steady. "It went to ground. The old builders ran the chain for that." The old builders ran the chain for that. He had stood at that door for 8 months. He knew the lightning chain ran down the corner buttress to a copper plate in the rock, because he had asked, because a man who keeps a post learns his post. And so when the sky came down on the king's brow, it found the copper the long-dead builders had laid for exactly that hour, and it went harmlessly into the stone, and the watch went on. There is a kind of faith that is only sentiment, and there is a kind that has read the drawings and knows where the chain runs. His was the second kind. It is the only kind that holds in a storm. Then a slate came off the roof. I heard it go, a high tearing shriek as the wind peeled it up, and I saw it in a flash of lightning, a black blade of stone sailing flat and fast straight at the doors, straight at him. I shouted. There was no time in the shout. And Edric Lyle, who had not moved his feet for 3 hours through wind that staggered grown men, moved then, one short, controlled step inside the doorway's stone reveal, a handspan of shelter, exactly far enough and not 1 inch farther, and the slate struck the bronze door where his head had been and shattered, and the pieces went away on the wind, and before the echo of it had died, he had stepped back onto his mark. He had moved to live, he had not moved to leave. I understood, finally, the thing I had come up the hill not knowing. I had thought the watch was about not moving. It is not. A statue does not move. The watch is about choosing, every single moment with your own free will and against every reason the storm can give you, to keep faith with men who cannot ask it of you. The slate proved it. He would dodge a killing blow because a dead sentry guards nothing, but he would not take 1 step toward comfort, toward the truck, toward me, toward the warm rooms and the line that called it forgivable. The first was duty. The second was desertion, and a boy of 19 in the dark in the worst storm in 50 years knew the difference between them better than his major did. That was when I heard the truck on the road below, lights climbing the bends, and knew the relief was coming up the brow. And that was when the wind brought down the bridge. The brow road crosses a gorge at the 4th bend. On an old stone span the maps call the Crook Bridge, And what brought it down was not the wind alone but the river, for the rain off the whole high country had come down the gorge in a single brown flood, and it took the bridge out from under the relief truck's wheels with a groan I heard a mile off in the dark, a deep wrong sound like a great bone breaking. There was a long second of nothing. Then Hesk's voice came up to me, torn and faint on the field radio that worked again now the relief had brought a fresh set up the hill. The bridge was gone, the truck had stopped a wheel's width from the edge, his men were safe, and the road to the mausoleum was cut. Nothing on wheels would cross that gorge before morning. There would be no relief detail up the brow tonight. There would be no corporal to say the words of the watch. There would be no lawful changing of the post. Which meant that, by the only rule that mattered to the boy at the doors, the watch was still his, and there was no longer any way to take it from him before dawn but to drag him off it. I made the third decision then, and it was the hardest of the three, and I have never once regretted it. I keyed the radio and I told Hesk to hold the men at the broken bridge, to set up what shelter he could, and to wait for first light. I told him the watch on the brow was unbroken and would remain so. And then I did the thing a major does perhaps twice in a career. I crossed the open ground to where Private Lyle stood at the doors of the Dead Kings, and I took my place at the wall an arm's length from him, facing out into the storm as he faced out into it, and I said, loud enough for him to hear over the wind, "Then we will keep it together, Private, the two of us, until it can be lawfully relieved." He did not thank me. A man on that post does not thank you for joining it. That would make it a favor, and it is not a favor, it is the watch. But I saw him straighten the last quarter-inch he had in him, and I understood that I had just told a freezing 19-year-old boy the only thing in the world that could have warmed him, that he had been right, that his major had come to see it, and that he was not alone anymore on the king's brow. We stood the rest of that storm side by side, and I will tell you what passed between us, because it is the heart of the whole night. For a long while we said nothing. There is nothing to say on a watch, that is rather the point. But somewhere in the cold middle of it, when the wind eased into one of its long lulls and the rain came almost gently for a few minutes, the boy spoke, and he spoke not to me exactly but out into the dark, the way men do when the night has worn the rank off both of them. "My grandfather stood this post, sir," he said, 40 years gone. He told me once it was the proudest duty in the regiment, and I thought he was being old. I thought, anyone can stand still at a door no one comes to. He paused, and the wind filled the pause, and then he went on. "I know now what he meant. It's the one watch that's only honor. Every other post, there's a reason you defend it that isn't honor. There's a king who can be hurt, a gate that can be rushed, a thing to be guarded that fights back. Here there's nothing but the keeping of faith. If you'll keep it here where there is no reason but the right one, then they know you'll keep it anywhere." He was quiet a moment. "That's why they send us here first, to find out." I have commanded soldiers most of my life, and I had never once heard the post explained truer than that boy explained it to the dark, with his teeth chattering, 3 hours into a storm that had killed 3 men in the lower town that same night. "And the Dead Kings?" I asked him. I do not know why. Perhaps I wanted to hear him say it. "The dead can't call out, sir," he said simply. "That's the whole of it. The living ones have a voice. The dead ones gave us everything they had, and then they went where they can't ask for one more thing, not even to be remembered, not even to be kept. So somebody has to stand for them on their own because it's right, when there's nothing in it. The dead do not stand their own watch." He said the old words of the post the way you would say a prayer you had finally understood. I used to say it because it was carved up there. Tonight I know what it means. The storm came back then, harder than before, as if it had been listening and meant to answer, and we faced it and we held, and there is not much more to tell of the standing of it except that we stood. The 4th hour. The 5th. The cold deep in the bones now, the kind that stops being painful, which is the dangerous kind. I made him talk through the worst of it, made him answer me, kept his mind out of the warm, dark place the cold wanted to take it. I told him about my own first post and the corporal who'd terrified me. He told me about his grandfather's medals in a drawer at his mother's house. We were two men at a door in the dark, and the kings lay quiet behind the bronze, and the watch was unbroken, and the storm could not have it. And then, in the worst of all of it, in the deepest black before the dawn, something happened that I have never spoken of to a board of inquiry and never will, because there is no box on any form for it. I am not a fanciful man. I will tell it as it was and let you make of it what you make of it. The wind, at its very height, found the bronze doors, found the narrow gaps where the great panels meet, and it began, as it forced through them, to make a sound. A low, full, sustained note, many notes layered, rising and falling as the gusts rose and fell. It was the storm playing the doors of the dead kings like the pipes of a great organ. It rolled out over the brow and down toward the drowned dark city, deep and solemn and unhurried, for long minutes together. It was the most mournful and the most dignified sound I have ever heard in my life, and standing there in it, soaked to the soul, I had the unshakable feeling, say what you like, that the watch was not, after all, being kept by only two cold men. That the storm itself, for that one stretch, had stopped trying to break the watch and had begun, in its enormous voice, to keep it with us, to stand the honor of it, to grieve the dead kings in a music no choir of the living could ever match. The boy heard it too. I know he did, because he turned his face a quarter-inch toward the doors, and I saw, by the next pale walk of lightning across the bay, that he was not afraid. He was at attention before something he understood to be greater than the storm. So was I. The note died away as the gusts fell, and the rain began at long last to slacken. And far out over the Worm Sea, where the black met the black, the first gray thread of the dawn came up under the edge of the world. The storm did not end all at once. The great storms never do. They go like a beaten thing in spasms, falling back and lunging again, hating to be over. But the worst of it was spent, and as the gray grew in the east, the wind dropped from a wall to a gale to merely a hard, cold wind, and the rain thinned, and the long, terrible night of the king's brow began at last to lift off us. I could see the boy clearly now in the rising light for the first time since the lantern died. I almost wish I could not have. He was the color of ash. The rain had frozen in fine ice along the brim of his cap and the brass of his buttons. His lips were gray, and his hands on the rifle had gone past white to a waxen blue, and he was holding it at the order by main force of will, the way you hold a thing when your hands have stopped being yours. He had been on his feet, at attention in the open, for the better part of 15 hours, and through the whole second half of them in a storm that had taken roofs and lives off the city below. By every measure I know, he should have been on the ground hours ago. He was standing, eyes forward on his mark. I will not tell you he was not nearly finished, because he was, but he was not finished yet, and not yet is the whole of the watch. The watch is never won. It is only kept, one more minute and then one more until you are lawfully relieved, and he meant to keep it until he was. Down at the gorge in the gray light I saw movement. Hesk and his men had not waited idle through the night. They had taken the truck's winch cable and a felled pine, and they had bridged the broken span, not for the truck, that was hopeless, but for a man to cross on his hands and knees above the falling river. And across that desperate makeshift, in the first real light of morning, came the relief. It was Corporal Vane, the senior man of the watch detail, and he came up the last bends of the Brow Road at something between a march and a run, soaked and gasping, with the dry kit slung on his back and the worst of the climb behind him, and on his face the particular look of a man who has crossed a broken bridge over a flood in the dark, because there was a sentry up the hill who had not been relieved. He did not waste a breath when he reached the mausoleum. He took one look at Lyle and one look at me, and a king's own corporal of 20 years' service understood the whole of the night in a single glance, and he did the only thing that mattered. He fell in at the doors. He came to attention an arm's length from Edric Lyle, facing the bronze, and he steadied his breathing, and he drew himself up, and in a voice gone hoarse from the river and the cold, but every word of it carved and clear, he said the words of the watch, the full ceremony, Nothing left out, nothing hurried in the teeth of the dying storm on the most exposed rock in the kingdom, over 2 men more dead than alive, because the boy had kept faith with the form through the whole night, and the regiment was not about to break faith with him at the end of it. "The watch is relieved," said Corporal Vane. "The post is taken. The dead do not stand their own watch, and they have not stood it alone." That last line is not in the ceremony. He put it there. I have made sure it has been there ever since. And only then, when the words had been properly said over the post, when the watch had been lawfully and honorably relieved at the bronze doors of the dead kings, did Private Edric Lyle move. He brought his rifle from the order to the slope. He took 1 pace back from the mark he had held for 15 hours. He turned with the last of everything he had, and he saluted the doors, saluted the kings, the dead who could not thank him and would never know, a slow, exact, unbroken salute in the gray dawn light, water running off his sleeve. And then his legs went out from under him, all at once, the way a thing goes when it has held past the end of itself, and I caught him before he reached the stone. He was conscious. He looked up at me from the circle of my arm, that ash-gray face, and there was no fear in it and no complaint and no asking to be praised. There was only a kind of quiet that I have seen on very few faces in my life, and never on one so young, the quiet of a man who has been weighed against the hardest thing he will ever face, and was not found wanting. "Did I keep it, sir?" he asked me. His voice was barely there. "I have given a great many orders in my life. I have read a great many men their commendations. I have never in my life been so glad to be able to answer a question." "You kept it, Edric," I told him. "You kept it whole. Not 1 minute of it broke. Now you are relieved, and that is an order. Let me carry you down off this hill." And I did. We got dry kit on him and hot drink into him in the lee of the mausoleum, and when the lower span could be crossed, we brought him down the broken road on a litter, with Corporal Vane behind us holding the post until a full detail could be sent up, the watch flowing on unbroken behind us the way it had flowed unbroken for 400 years, and Edric Lyle had not been the man to break it. He spent 8 days in the infirmary. The cold had gone deep, and 2 of his fingers gave the surgeons a fright, but he was young and he was strong and he came back whole, and on the 9th day he was back on light duties in the guardroom, quieter than before, but in the way a sword is quieter after it has been tempered, not the way a thing is quiet after it has been broken. There was an inquiry, of course. There is always an inquiry. A boy had nearly died on a post. A major had stayed up a mountain in a once-in-a-generation storm rather than order his own sentry off it. A bridge was down, and a relief detail had crossed a flood on a felled pine. The board sat for a morning. I told them the truth, the whole of it, and I told them that if they wished to find fault with the conduct of the watch on the king's brow that night, they would have to begin by finding fault with 400 years of the regiment, because everything Private Lyle had done, he had done by the book and beyond the book, and the only man on that hill who had at any point wished to break the watch was me, when I came up the road meaning to order him off it. I told them that the boy had been right and his major had been wrong, and that I had learned more about my own profession in one night, standing beside a 19-year-old at a door, than in 23 years of giving orders. The board did not find fault. The board, to its great credit, did something better. It wrote into the standing orders of the mausoleum a new line, that the honor watch is to be kept in all weathers as it has always been kept, but that in conditions where the lawful relief cannot reach the post, the duty officer is to share the watch rather than break it, so that no sentry of the king's own shall ever again keep the dead kings entirely alone against a storm. They called it, in the dry language of standing orders, the brow provision. We call it something else in the regiment. We call it Lyle's watch. But that is the paperwork of it, and the paperwork is the least of it. Here is the rest. I had thought that night that no one would ever hear of it. That was rather the whole terrible beauty of the thing while it was happening. A boy keeping perfect faith in the dark with no eyes on him, No crowd, no camera, no one to tell. I had thought the watch on the king's brow was the one duty in the world that could never become a story, because there is nothing to see and no one to see it. I was wrong about that too. It got out the way the true things always get out, slowly, quietly, by word of mouth, from one soldier to another. Hesk told it to the men at the broken bridge while they waited for the light. Vane told it in the guardroom. The story of the boy who would not give the kings to the storm went down off the brow and into the regiment, and from the regiment it went, the way these things go, out into the city of Carodine, which had spent that same night losing its roofs and its boats and 3 of its people to the sea. And I have thought a great deal about why it took hold there, in a city with its own grief fresh that morning, and I believe I understand it now. A city that has just been hurt by a storm does not want to hear that the storm won. The people of Carodine had stood at their windows all that night and watched the last light in the kingdom, the watch lantern on the brow, and they had watched it go out, and they had thought, there, even that is gone now, even the kings are given to the dark. And then in the morning they learned that the light had gone out, but the watch had not. That a boy had stood at the door of the dead through the whole of it and not stepped back. That the storm had thrown its worst at the one post in the kingdom that exists for no reason but honor, and the honor had held. I cannot tell you what that meant to them, except by what they did with it. They began to walk up the brow. Not in crowds, the place does not allow crowds, and they knew it, but a few at a time in the weeks after, in the calm bright weather that always follows a great storm, as though the world were ashamed of itself. They came up the mended road to the mausoleum, and they stood a little distance off, and they looked at the bronze doors and the lone sentry at his post in the sunshine, and then they went quietly down again. They did not come to gawk. They came the way you visit a thing that has steadied you. An old fisherman who had lost his boat that night came up, I was told, and stood a long while and said to the sentry only, "Thank you for keeping the light," though there was no light to keep by then, only the man, and then he went home. They understood that the man was the light. They had always half known it. The storm had made it plain. Edric Lyle stood that post many times again before his service was done, in fair weather and foul, and he never once spoke of that night as anything but an ordinary watch kept the ordinary way, because that is exactly what he believed it to be, and that belief is the whole reason it became a legend. The men who try to be legends never are. It is always the man who thought he was only doing his plain duty, and could not for the life of him understand the fuss, who ends up carved over the door. He is older now, Edric. He trains the young ones who go up to the brow for the first time frightened, the way he was frightened, and I am told that when he posts them he says very little, only what I once said carelessly, and he taught me to say as though it were the truest thing in the world, that the dead do not stand their own watch, and so we stand it for them, and we stand it whole. I am an old man myself these days, and I have laid down most of what I carried in this service, and I will tell you the one thing I have kept. Anyone can hold a post when the king is watching, or the crowd, or the camera. Anyone can keep faith when there is something in it. The measure of a man, the only measure I have ever found worth a coin, is what he keeps faith with in the dark, when the storm is at its worst, and no one is watching, and the only thing standing between honor and the dark is whether you, alone, decide to hold. I came up the king's brow that night to bring a boy in out of a storm. He sent me back down a better man, having taught me what the watch was for, and the kings, behind their bronze doors, kept all that they ever needed kept. The light went out. The watch did not. It never has. And God willing, while there are men like Edric Lyle to stand it, it never will.